Welcome to Glenview Community Church Speaker Forum. For those that do not know you, I'm Elizabeth, or do not know me. I'm Elizabeth Hartung, and I'm one of the pastors at Glenview Community Church. And I want to welcome you to this Speakers Forum. We're going to talk about becoming and how we become a wise congregation, and then hear about how to. Are you going to let people in, Lauren?
Yeah, I'll let people in while you're talking, and then we'll take turns.
And this is our first Zoom, all Zoom program. So we're looking forward to it. And then we're going to hear from a licensed psychologist who's going to talk to us about mental health during a pandemic. But I'm looking forward to getting going in this conversation about becoming a wise congregation, because as I talk to folks, I realized when I ask someone how they are, sometimes I'm talking about their physical self, but sometimes I'm also talking about their mental well-being. And now that we're in a pandemic, we really worry more about our physical self, right? And if we're getting sick. And so it's important in some ways to clarify when I'm asking the question to say, how are you doing, physically, and how are you doing mentally? And I think that's a conversation we need to have practice having on a regular basis. So I want to thank Lauren Bowerschmidt, who is our WISE chairperson, who is going to tell us more about what we're going to hear about this evening. Thank you, Lauren.
Awesome. Yes, thank you and welcome. Like Elizabeth said, I'm the chair of the WISE Mental Health Committee here at Glenview Community Church. So excited to see everybody here. I want to start with a little bit of housekeeping. I know that many of us have become quite adept at Zoom, for better or for worse, but I want to just cover a few things as we get going. Elizabeth and I have the power to mute you, so I've muted everybody so that we can hear the speakers more clearly. If you have a question, please put it into the chat box and I'll be monitoring that, and I will ask the questions at the end. So if you are on a computer and you kind of wave your mouse around, you'll see down at the bottom the word chat, and you click that and you can type your message in and it will come to me. And then that will be the easiest way to do that. And then also for those who may or may not be as familiar with it, with Zoom, if you're on your computer, the top right corner, you can change it either from speaker view or gallery view if you want to see just the person speaking, or if you want to see all of our smiling faces, you can do that too. And if you're on an iPad, you just swipe back and forth and you'll see everybody or just the speaker. So whew, all the Zoom stuff taken care of. So thank you so much for being here tonight. We're gonna start our discussion with Reverend Kirk Moore. If you wanna wave for a second so you can introduce yourself. Good, he's the pastor at St. Paul's UCC in Downers Grove. He's a member of the UCC Mental Health Network WISE team. And he's going to introduce our congregation to what WISE, which is the welcoming, inclusive, supportive, engaged concept, as we GCC work to become a UCC certified congregation for mental health. Then we're going to spend the majority of our time together tonight with Dr. Jim Liggett. Wave, Jim, there he is. Who's going to discuss the really critical topic of dealing with mental health issues during a pandemic. So he's going to focus on ways to help ourselves and walk with others in the congregation and really our wider community. So once again, thank you for being here. Just want to give you a quick little background about our speakers. Our first speaker, like I said, is Reverend Kirk Moore. He's from St. Paul UCC, as I said. He is an ordained minister. He's been involved with the Illinois Conference for UCC for 26 years and has been a pastor at St. Paul's since 2012. And I love this as a music person myself. He's also a certified music practitioner, playing therapeutic music at the bedside to help create a healing environment. That gives me warm fuzzies all over, so that's great. Our second speaker is Dr. Jim Liggett. Dr. Liggett is a licensed clinical psychologist with over a decade of experience helping people who struggle with anxiety, depression, relationship issues, low self-esteem, and underachievement. He has a particular affinity for work with adolescent and adult males on emotional expressiveness, anger management, and social skills. Additional areas of expertise include marital intimacy, parent coaching, existential quandaries, which I'm there, and anti-bullying initiatives. Dr. Liggett practices alongside a small group of independent psychologists, psychiatrists, and neurophysiologists in Arlington Heights. So we are in good hands tonight. Thanks to both of you for being here and supporting us today. So Reverend Moore, let's start with you. The floor is yours.
Okay, well, thank you. And thanks for having me tonight. I am, as you said, I'm part of the Mental Health Network and part of the Welcoming, Inclusive, Supportive, and Engaged team, which means that I get to speak with you or other congregations about what it might look like to become wise. I have a very small history with Glenview Community Church. Last time there was a Fox Valley Association meeting there about 6 years ago, I was there. And also my wife hosted a student from Palestine back in the mid-teen 2000s or early 2000s as part of the Hands of Peace project. So I've had warm feelings about Glenview Community Church for a long time. And becoming wise, it starts with an idea of we all have mental health, right? I mean, we're health is health. I mean, we can get deep, and Jim will go deeper into that our bodies and our minds are intertwined in everything, and what happens inside our brain is part of a physical organ, but also it's part of our thought process, and on and on and on. The Mental Health Network wanted to find a way to encourage congregations to, one, remove the stigma of mental health treatment away from something else, as in, back before pandemic, when we used to bring meals to people who needed meals, mental health treatment wasn't something that you got a casserole for, right? And we thought that mental health treatment ought to be something that you get a casserole for. That's making it too small, but that's the idea behind it. And even before we started the WISE concept, we had changed our name from the Mental Illness Network that was founded in 1992 to the Mental Health Network around 2012 or 2010, somewhere in there. We thought that it made more sense that we're taking care of mental health, and we didn't want to talk about mental illness with the same push, I guess you could say. So the WISE concept, welcoming, inclusive, supportive, and engaged, was born as part of a resolution at the United Church of Christ General Synod. And after we got that done, we're like, well, congregations need to say that they're wise. And that was about it. Well, we started to develop some more things since then. And some of the resources that you may have already looked at, Lauren, has a team or anybody here looked at some resources based on?
Yes, there are a handful of us who are on the WISE committee. You've already met Kieran and Marvin and Marianne earlier, and there's a couple other of us. So yes, we've seen the booklet with the 10 steps, and we've seen the website. And so yes, we have started digging into those resources that you have. So it's wonderful.
So we came up with resource after resource and then tried to put them into a format that was good for just about any person. Hence the free PDF that you can download, or if you want to pay money for it, you can go to UCC resources and get one that's already printed out, a nice fine booklet thing. But it's also, as part of our commitment, welcoming, inclusive, supportive, and engaged for mental health, it goes a little bit beyond that. And so our resources, especially those two, are available as text-only documents for people who don't see as well, or that would have to have a reader read it out loud from their computer, and PDFs aren't as friendly with all of that. So we tried to take care of that. Take care is not quite the right word, but we tried to make things even more inclusive, because that inclusive part doesn't just mean mental health, even though for the WISE thing, yes, it does mean mental health. But where we've expanded from that is we are in cooperation and in partnership with the disabilities ministries and the A2A program. Now, you don't have to be A2A, accessible to all, to be WISE. And the UCC has so many acronyms that just, too many of them. But A2A and WISE, and also ONA, which is a little more controversial for some people, but open and affirming, is part of that too, because as when we're talking about being welcoming, inclusive, supportive, and engaged for mental health, we kind of really have to acknowledge that a person's sexual orientation, a person's gender or gender identity are not based in a medical science that says that they are deficient if they are gay or if they are transgendered or transgender, anything like that. And so that part of the journey that you'll go on is discussing all of those things and wrestling with all of the things so that it's not just a check the box and look, we're wise. It's a journey, and I encourage you to not just say, yep, we're it, because it just doesn't work that way. It's a journey that the whole congregation goes on, and the committee, it's really important to help the congregation go through that. And I'm going to stop talking.
Well, thank you very much. GCC is an open and affirming congregation, and so we've gone through that process. So at least some of us who are around for that part of it are aware of that. And I agree, it's definitely not something that we check the box and walk away from.
Mm-hmm.
It's something we continue to work on all the time. So thank you for that overview. It's awesome. It's reassuring to know that as we go through this, if we have any questions or gosh, we need some support, you are here with us. So that's really great. We really
Not
appreciate
your boss, I'm just a helper along the way.
That's perfect. I appreciate that very much. Thank you, Kirk. So Jim, I would like to turn the floor over to you. I think you can unmute yourself, or I can find the button here. You can unmute, and then the floor is yours. So I think, there you go.
All right,
Awesome.
testing. Can you hear me? Good?
You're
All
good.
right.
Yep.
All right, here we go. Greetings, everyone. Greetings from my guest room, which has served as my private practice since March. Great commute, no complaints here. Very happy to be able to continue working during this very turbulent time, and looking forward to speaking with you tonight. As a psychologist, I wear a few different hats, but primarily I facilitate psychotherapy, also known as talk therapy. For those who are unfamiliar, talk therapy is a process whereby individuals, couples, families sit with a mental health provider with the aim of understanding and addressing various problems of living. Basically, we try to be helpful companions as people endeavor to figure it out, okay? And the it in figure it out can mean many different things to many different people at many different phases of life. But since March, this is probably no huge surprise, the focus of our sessions has really narrowed to coping. Day-to-day coping, self-care, right? Now, self-care has always been important, but in my estimation, in this fast-paced life we live, we've sort of thought of it as something, if we could fit it in, great. If not, so be it. Sort of like like a cherry on the ice cream sundae of life. If it's there, great, but it certainly doesn't ruin the experience if we don't make time for it. So historically, maybe people thought of self-care as, scented candles with a bath or an occasional walk in the woods. Both are great things. But in this perfect storm of COVID and economic strain, sociopolitical turbulence, the holidays are here, it's cold, it's dark, the bears are awful, right? All these things in a blender really call for what we're terming radical self-care, okay? Radical self-care. To me, radical self-care is about the creation of a tool belt of personalized approaches to survive and thrive in these difficult times. And that right there will be my topic for this evening. A tool belt of physical coping skills, psychological, social, how do we fit technology into this world we're living in? And last but certainly not least, is there some meaning we can take from all of this, okay? I hope you don't mind. I've opted to be somewhat informal tonight, so no academic citations or anything like that, but everything I'm presenting has been synthesized from books and journals and articles and about 1,000 hours of face-to-face time since March with my clients and my personal experience as well. all of this is aspirational, okay? My advice is if you could pick one or two things that I present tonight and sort of gently aim at them, then that's fantastic, right? If you take 4 or 5, hey, that's great. If you take none, but still showed up in an attempt to address some coping skills, then I think that's fantastic as well. Above everything, self-compassion is key, right? There's no owner's guide. This is very unprecedented. We're all doing the best we can. So if there's one takeaway, please hear this loud and clear. Self-compassion needs to be, your number one focus above all. And I would imagine this goes without saying, but I'll say it anyhow. Just because I'm presenting this stuff, that does not suggest that I have it all figured out. My tools are worn down. Some are broken. Sometimes my belt falls right off my waist and goes crashing on the ground. Ultimately, I think the reality of it is these desperate times, we probably don't want to be at the mercy of too many desperate measures. So I think we want to do our best to ultimately find and refine strategies that work for each of us. Okay. So let's start with physical, okay? Physical. Humans are remarkably resilient when it comes to short-term stress. You may remember early on in the pandemic, yes, there was widespread worry, but perhaps you had some more energy, focus. There was a certain crispness, like let's batten down the hatches. This is only going to be 2 weeks. We could do this. Might even be fun, right? Well, I think where most of us are now, prolonged, unremitting stress, we don't do well with that, right? The reason being, it puts our bodies and our minds on a state of heightened alert. And in the spirit of what goes up must go down, we eventually run into what's called alarm fatigue, also known as exhaustion, burnout, depletion, whatever you like to call it. You certainly know the feeling, I would imagine. What's unique about this is much of alarm fatigue tends to manifest physically, that is, on our body. So if we're feeling this on our body, we need to cope in a physical way. So I'll talk about 4 areas of that right now. The first being, and you've heard it 1,000 times, but I'll say it again, exercise, right? Movement, walking, jogging, running, weights, yoga, dancing, whatever the case may be. All these things help with sleep, stamina, alertness, self-esteem, mood, right? It feels like an accomplishment to kind of sweat and get moving. And internally, it creates these wonderful happy chemicals called endorphins that are positively reinforcing. So the more exercise we do, the more endorphins are made, the more we might want to exercise the next day and the next day. So little bit goes a long way. If you're physically able to do so and can integrate some of this into your life, I think it'll be absolutely worth it. Okay, so if we have movement pushing forward, we need to restore. First thing that comes to mind perhaps is sleep. A lot of my clients are struggling with sleep. I'm struggling with sleep at times as well, right? A very popular search term over the last several months is sleep hygiene. Sleep hygiene refers to a set of practices that help us honor and prepare for sleep each night. Such techniques include use your bedroom as a sanctuary, right? Let's not be watching the Bears game on the bed or eating food or studying, that type of thing. If we can just have it be used for sleep, our mind starts to recognize, okay, this bed that I'm in, this is the place of sleep, all right? So in addition to using your bedroom sort of as a sanctuary, watching your alcohol and caffeine intake certainly is very important. Knowing when to turn the phones off, when to turn the TV off. Maybe a book helps you kind of fade away, right? Maybe a warm bath. To have some sort of sleep-based routine is really essential at this time. So I would suggest that you give that some thought if you haven't already. Okay. Restorative also includes breathing. We take approximately 20,000 breaths per day. And certainly almost all are just automatic, and that's a good thing, right? But not all breaths are created equal, right? If we sit and focus on our breathing, we can get much more of that accordion effect that is so valuable for us, right? The deeper we breathe, the more oxygen goes to our brain, which stimulates our parasympathetic nervous system, which basically is a fancy way of saying it calms us down. It keeps us settled, okay? We can practice breathing, right? In through the nose to a count of 3, hold it for a count of 3, exhale through a count of 3. Practicing can retrain your breathing, and I'll tell you how I know that. I took a meditation course years ago, and I really committed to trying to retrain my breathing. So much so that my wife would constantly ask, "Why are you sighing? Why are you sighing?" 9 out of 10 times I wasn't sighing, sometimes I was. But what was happening was my body had just automatically learned to take deeper breaths, all right? And a little tidbit I thought I would share. There is some research from sociology that suggests that body image concerns have actually led to less meaningful breathing, body image concerns. So what would be the connection there? Well, the theory based on some survey, and this is out of Harvard, so I think it probably has some credence, is that the more body image expectations out in the world, the more we're learning to naturally constrict our stomach, kind of suck it in, right? Which is impeding that nice accordion sort of flow that's so important. So I thought I would share that. I don't know that that's incredibly helpful, but maybe something to be mindful of, okay? Last but not least, if we have sleep, if we have breathing, there are a variety of excellent relaxation techniques that are very portable and helpful. One in particular is called progressive muscle relaxation. Very simple, okay? You start at your toes, you go to your calves, to your thighs, to your backside, basically from the bottom up to your shoulders, out to your arms, okay? You want to tense whatever group of muscles you're focusing on. Tense it while you breathe in, hold, and then let go as you breathe out. So you're doing that simultaneously. It's a little bit like walking and chewing gum at the same time, but you'll get it pretty quickly if you focus on it. This is great for if you're in bed, if you're at the office, if you sit in a chair all day like I do, okay? Tensing a muscle group while you breathe in, and then letting go as you breathe out. Progressive muscle relaxation, okay? So under the physical, we have movement, we have restoration. Here's one that people often don't think about, okay? Grooming. How do we tend to our physical body, okay? I work with a lot of adolescents, and a lot of my adolescents don't always love to shower and brush their teeth and all that type of thing. And certainly the pandemic has led to a lot of sessions with them in their pajamas, which is fine. I don't really mind, but I do ask them, do you imagine going through the day in your grubbies? Does that affect your mindset? Does that actually make you feel kind of grubby, kind of fatigued? Does your mind think, geez, this person's still in his pajamas? Is he awake? Does it confuse your mind, right? Does it affect the ambiance of the household? So if you have a family, everyone's kind of lounging around. Do people tend to feel a little bit more lazy, a little bit more sluggish, right? I don't know, but it's maybe something to think about. I'll tell you, I feel the freshest if I get up, I shower, I shave, right? I have some nice crisp clothing on. It just feels like a great way to start the day. So tending to your physical self in terms of grooming, an important point. And last but not least, and I won't spend much time on this, just being mindful of food and drink, right? We've talked about alcohol intake, caffeine intake previously as being something to monitor. There are a lot of studies based on surveys that say people are actually eating healthier meals because they're cooking more, but it's the snacks that are really getting to people, right? The nervous eating, okay? So being mindful of your food, being sure to drink plenty of water, that type of thing is probably something to be thoughtful about from time to time. Okay, so that is round one of 5, physical. Next up, I'll take a glass of water. I'll take my own advice. Let's talk about psychology. Okay, psychology during a pandemic, right? When we talk about psychology, we're usually talking about emotions, thoughts, and behaviors. And I point to my foot because typically behaviors are action-oriented. Okay, with emotions, we are definitely seeing an uptick in depression, anxiety, irritability, apathy, cynicism. To all of these, there is no better antidote than expressiveness in the context of a supportive relationship, right? Whether that's with a friend, family, pastor, therapist, church group. We have to remember that, yes, best practices call for physical distancing, but that doesn't really mean that we can't, that doesn't really mean social distancing, right? I wish they changed that, physical distancing, not social distancing. If we do not find a way to express emotions, they will find a way out, okay? And that is typically done in what's called somatic symptoms, meaning they're worn on our body. I know for myself, I tend to wear it in the back of my neck. Some people get back pain, gastrointestinal symptoms, that type of thing, okay? So somatic symptoms, if we don't let it out, passive aggressiveness, moodiness, impulsive decision-making, right? In the words of Maya Angelou, there is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside of you. There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside of you. Reams of research support this. Thousands of years of anecdotal evidence suggest the idea that if you name it, you tame it. Academics aside, if you've ever seen B.B. King play a blues or Pavarotti sing an aria, you certainly can understand the power of expression, right? BB's up there with Lucille, his trusty guitar. He sings a bluesy lyric. The crowd feels it. They kind of give him back energy, which just drives him forward. And this beautiful, artistic, meaningful, reciprocal relationship going on. Okay, you don't have to be the king of the blues to do this. You don't even have to be a poet or use deep, meaningful language to express yourself, right? Just the idea of sitting with a trusted person, expressing yourself, there's a lot of important cathartic and relieving relief that could come from that, okay? So that's emotions. Next up is thoughts. We're definitely seeing an uptick in concentration issues, forgetfulness, chronic generalized worry, and negativity. So with worry, we have to accept that some is appropriate. In fact, some is even healthy, right? It keeps us vigilant. It keeps us aware and scanning our environment for potential threat. The problem becomes when we get hyper vigilant, right? We're seeing threat where it doesn't exist. We're too much on edge, okay? So here's some ideas on that. First and foremost, sort of in line with the serenity prayer, we have to understand what do we have control over and what do we not. We have to understand, for example, we can control our adherence to best practices, right? Hand washing and mask and social physical distancing, but we can't necessarily change how our neighbors respond to it. I know early on in the pandemic, I would get bent out of shape when I would see someone walk down the street or a grocery store without a mask. But at a certain point, is it best for us to kind of let that go, right? Is that necessary for us to be able to really sustain, a cool, calm demeanor in this day and age? I think it might be, okay? So to know what we have control over and to know what we don't, the serenity prayer, okay? Second, when in crisis, our mind often tends to catastrophize, which is a very fancy and hard to pronounce word for thinking about the worst case scenario. So I'm going to give you a real quick exercise here by a gentleman named Martin Seligman. It's portable. It's really helpful. I use it a lot with my clients, teens in particular, okay? White piece of paper, 3 boxes, 1, 2, 3. In the far left, to sketch out, to write out whatever worst case scenario is dogging you, right? In the far right, write what the best case scenario is as it pertains to that topic. In the middle box, try to take bits and pieces of each, worst and best, to synthesize them into the middle case scenario. And as we all know, that is typically where reality lies. The idea with that exercise is to massage some of the tension out of this rigid, stubborn thought that keeps us up at night, right? If we take the time to deliberately do that, and that's why I like to do it on paper with a good old-fashioned pencil, you know, our eyes can really see it. It's more of a process, and it's a great way to loosen some of that catastrophic thinking, okay? The third piece is a topic of mindfulness, okay? You maybe have heard that term. Mindfulness is defined simply to focus on the present with a spirit of gratitude. To focus on the present with a spirit of gratitude. So in the present, we have here and now focus. We're not thinking about what we have to do today or later this month, right? We're trying to focus on the here and the now. With the gratitude, this piece kind of reminds us of that which we have to be thankful for, right? So 2 positive themes, present focus and gratitude. I'll give you an example, okay? Coffee, I love coffee, right? And I decided to apply mindfulness to my morning coffee drinking. I used to simply get up, my coffee is on a timer, it would be made for me. I'd kind of have maybe a little bit of the butterflies in the morning. I'd go down the stairs, I'd pour a cup of coffee, get on my phone, kind of just slurp it down, and voila, that's the beginning of my day, okay? Now I try to apply some of these mindfulness principles to my coffee. Stick with me, I know this is gonna sound a little goofy, but I think it's something worth considering, okay? Now I get up, I lie in bed for a minute, and I smell the coffee downstairs beckoning to me, right? Walk down the stairs, go over to the cabinet, and I pick a mug this mug in particular, my favorite, go Blackhawks. I've had this mug in my life for about a decade. I take a moment and I look at the mug. I actually thank the mug. Stay with me, right? Walk over to the coffee maker. Take the coffee out. Smell the coffee, pour the coffee in slowly but surely. Watch the steam rise. I get my hands around the mug, right? I can feel the warmth. Take a nice breath in. My wife and I went to Hawaii for our 10-year anniversary. We took a tour of a coffee plantation. So sometimes I deliberately think about that experience, right? What I'm doing is I'm making coffee a mini morning meditation. Try saying that 3 times. A mini meditation in the morning, right? I'm incorporating visualization. I'm activating my senses, right? I'm feeling it, I'm smelling it. I'm watching the steam come out, and I'm certainly tasting it. I'm expressing gratitude for what coffee brings to my morning, because it is an important part of the morning, especially with a 2-year-old. I'm slowing down time. I'm not just rushing through it, and I'm savoring it, okay? All these things really change, well, let me put it this way. Option A is I just slurp my coffee down and get on the news. Option B is this little, listen, I've gone from Glenview to Hawaii, and I'm barely even awake yet, right? So I would encourage you to think about what might be a better way to wake up, right? If you want to pursue this further, this great book called The Art of Noticing by a gentleman named Rob Walker. It has 100 little tasks like this. I think you'll really like it. I would really highly suggest it. If you're tech savvy, the Calm or Thrive apps also can help guide you through a process like this, okay? So emotions, thoughts, let's end with behaviors, okay? You're hearing routine, 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 come up with a routine. And I think that's generally a good idea, as long as your routine is relatively flexible and breathable, okay? Not oppressive. We don't want to be bullied by our routine, all right? Within the routine, we've already discussed exercise, relaxation, sleep, these types of things are important. There is one piece of routine that can be really valuable, and that is novelty, right? Novelty. To search for each day something novel, even if it's really minor. Something novel like a different type of drink at the coffee drive-through. I swear I have different interests. A different type of show. Maybe you reach out to a friend that you haven't reached out to. Maybe your morning walk, you go a different route, okay? Novelty adds a distinct flavor to each day, and it's a great antidote to this sense that every day blurs into the next. A teenage client of mine likened it to this slow iceberg that's just unmoving day after day, the same thing, right? So novelty is a great way. It's not really going to fix that reality necessarily, but it's a nice thing to search for and might give each day a distinct flavor, as I said. Certainly in terms of behavioral ideas, creative endeavors, picking up your guitar, learning a few tunes, reading some good books, breaking into some of these great, fantastic shows. Chess has made a huge comeback. If you saw that on CBS Sunday morning, right? Learning to play chess or breaking it out again. Albums. Early on, I and a bunch of my friends would listen to albums with our headphones on from front to back. I listened to all of Van Morrison's Astral Weeks album, which is a classic and very meaningful to me. It provided a great escape, a great distraction. And if you have music and it's important to you, special to you, maybe think about sitting down, listening from front to back the entirety of an album, okay? So that is it under psychological. So we have physical, we have psychological. Let's talk about technology for a moment, okay? Technology, a great contributor. Clearly, we're meeting on it right now, but one that can bring significant problems if we don't deliberately decide how we want to integrate it into our life, okay? For instance, news, a lot of news lately. Rather than reflexively just go on your phone or your computers every now and then, maybe think about, when do I want to check? When do I not want to check? What sites do I want to go to and stay away from? Do I want to focus, like when it comes to COVID, on statistics more so than opinion-based or politically driven op-eds? Do I want to avoid the comment section at the bottom of these articles? That's always a rabbit hole you may want to avoid going down. It could be very toxic if you've been there, right? Just be mindful of when you open your phone. First thing in the morning, maybe not a great idea. Before you go to bed, not a great idea, right? If you have an important meeting, keep in mind a single headline can reverberate within your body and mind for hours in a way that creates a very toxic ripple effect. So to set some boundaries up might be something worth thinking about. Same with social media. What do I want my approach to be in social media? Do I want to be positive? Do I want to be someone who stirs it up in debates, right? How often do I want to go on this? Some of my clients have decided to not erase their social media accounts, but to erase the app or log off each time so that they don't have that immediate access, right? They actually have to sign in and try to remember their password. And during that time, they may decide, you know what, I don't need this right now. Also, if you're going to check, if you're going to make a comment, especially in the political world we're living in right now, you may want to check your physiology and your psychology before you write something, right? Scan yourself. How am I feeling right now? Am I clenching? Am I tight? Am I sort of overheated? Am I ticked off at something I read? At that moment, you may want to push away for a bit and really take a breather and determine, do I want to do this? Do I want to get out there? Do I want to stir it up online? Will this be feeding me in a way that's good for me? Okay. And last, within technology, I don't know if you have these unending text threads since March, but I do with a couple friend groups. I've opted to turn off the notifications. They still come to my phone, but it doesn't beep every time. I find that that's just a helpful way of really being able to keep a boundary between my phone and the rest of my life, right? With some of my friends, we've really made the agreement, let's keep it light, guys. Let's not get too heavy in here. If there's enough heaviness out there, let's just keep it light, talk about whatever, okay? And also, we've made an agreement, this is with my family in particular, not to really forward really heated or toxic or scary articles, right? There's a psychological defense mechanism called displacement. Essentially, the idea is if I were to read an article that was really disturbing or made me very worried, and I'm carrying all this anxiety all of a sudden, I might unconsciously seek ways to kind of tear a piece of that off and hand it to my text thread or to my wife or to my kids, right? In a way, it psychologically might make that burden a little bit, it might make the weight of that story a little bit less if you think about it, right? You're sort of sharing it amongst other people, not just holding it yourself. So be mindful of what you forward on, okay? Ask yourself, is this going to help this person's life or might it just stress them out, all right? When it comes to technology, I think the key is deliberate awareness of your patterns and tendencies. When we start getting into the mindlessness that technology engenders, that's when I think we start sort of allowing it to take us over rather than us exerting the control we would want to. Okay. Next up, let's talk about social support. I work with a lot of families, and one thing I have suggested is periodic family check-ins or the dreaded family meetings. Every time I say that, I get a groan, and I understand. It can feel like herding cats, especially if you have kids, trying to get everyone around, talking, being kind to each other, and I get it. But I do really recommend with families, with your spouse, with roommates, addressing such themes as, how's everyone doing? Simple question, right? Does anyone need more support? Does anyone need more space? Is anyone grappling with an element of this pandemic that's tricky for them and they'd like to talk about, right? Any ideas for new activities or a special meal or something like that? What are we grateful for? What's the good we're seeing in each other? Certainly you could go around the horn and talk about good things we're seeing in each other, sort of give compliments and praise, right? Is there any constructive criticism we can offer? Do we see any opportunities to assist our neighbors? This type of thing, this could be very nice, robust family discussion, but even if the discussion doesn't go anywhere, the visual of sitting with loved ones in a cohesive way, kind of problem solving together, I think that's very heartening for people, for kids in particular that might not understand all of this. So periodic family check-ins, I'm highly recommending. They can be brief, they could be informal, you can get ice cream, popcorn, whatever the case may be. Just don't lose sight of that, okay? Don't lose sight of that. On a more community-based level, Lauren asked me to discuss some themes of active listening and how we can best welcome people in who might approach us looking for our counsel or looking for support from us, okay? So I'm going to fire off a bunch of ideas here. And certainly if you'd like any sort of further information on it, you could ask a question at the end. I'd be happy to expand. Okay. Someone comes to us and they're looking for assistance. It's important to be calm, be patient, and be authentic. I think a lot of people, if someone comes to them looking for help, we get kind of tight and kind of anxious, like, wow, this is big. I've really got to do this. I got to fix this. But remember, if they're coming to you, they're doing so because at some point they deemed you to be a safe and approachable person to be. Good rule of thumb is don't rush to fix their problem. Rather sit to listen and understand. If it's a kid, start by asking, well, what do you know about this, Johnny, right? What do you know about this topic so far? Let's say it's COVID. Well, tell me what you're hearing. Right? What are the kids saying? This gives you a good basis to know where they're from. It also gives them a chance to articulate these ideas in a way in which they are actively problem solving. Okay. When it comes to active listening, we must remember that the body tells the tale. We communicate so much non-verbally that we have to be aware of our body language, right? So to sit in an open way, good eye contact, right? I tend to talk with my hands, but I think it probably shows that I'm engaged, right? Make sure you put your phone down, that type of thing. Little reflective statements along the way can go a long way. So if they say something like, I'm feeling really sad, to say, yeah, sad, huh? That just shows I'm with you, I'm listening, I'm a step behind you as you talk to me, okay? Reflective statements, very important. Use their language. So if a kid comes to you, let's say it's your kid, or if someone in the congregation comes to you and says, I'm really freaked out, don't reply with, you're clearly having an acute panic reaction, I understand, right? That creates a disconnect that can feel invalidating, right? They're using the phrase freaked out because it makes sense to them, and we don't want to impose our own language on them. If they're asking advice, offer bite-sized pieces, right? A lot of kids complain that their parents, best of intentions, they tend to go on and on and on and on, much like I probably am right now, right? Bring it down to bite-sized pieces. It's much more digestible and less overwhelming. If someone comes to you and they ask for some sort of information that you don't know, don't fake it. If you're working with a kid, for example, who is curious about certain details of COVID or emotional expression, right? There's a lot of great online animated content, or if they're older kids, some great stuff on YouTube to look out that can help bolster your feedback, okay? If you're interacting with your kids in particular, give tasks for them to feel in control. With my boys, I have a 2-year-old and a soon-to-be 6-year-old. The 6-year-old in particular knows, wash hands, keep your distance, and wear the mask, right? And he has this down. It's been the mantra of the household. And we don't do it in an intense way, or we don't scold him on it. We just do it as a reminder. And I believe this has given him a sense of control in all this. It's like he has a duty, almost like a superhero putting on their cape. He puts on the mask and it feels kind of neat to him, okay? And also with kids, don't give too much of a pass on tasks and chores and that type of thing. Even though kids would never acknowledge it, chores, task, routine, bedtime, this feels really safe, and it feels really comforting for kids to know that adults are containing them, right? They're still expecting things of them. The adults haven't let everything go, okay? Model good enough behaviors. No one is expected to be a perfect model of self-care during this time. In fact, it's not even really a great thing for kids to think of their parents as perfect, right? It's better to think of them as human. So good enough behaviors, that's a good thing to aim towards. Okay. Now, if someone comes to you and they're speaking to you and you sense they would like your assistance, a great way to end before you start giving your advice is something like, thank you for speaking to me, and I want to help. I have some ideas, but I would like first to hear what you think would be most helpful, okay? This is a great show of respect, and it empowers their sense of agency, right? It also gives you a sense of what they're looking for, because you may give advice that really doesn't pertain to them, and they may walk away only half helped, when they could be more thoroughly helped if you know what they're aiming for, okay? Be in touch with yourself as much as you can when you're trying to help others, right? Try not to impose your own worries. In my experience with kids, high school kids, even college kids, they're feeling more inconvenienced by this all than scared. The adults seem to be more scared about the economic implications, the political implications, and certainly some of the health-based concerns, okay? Last but not least, whether it's someone in your community or a kid, this is not a one-time conversation to have with them. So you don't need to get all your brilliance out in one fell swoop, right? Check-ins are important. Check-ins are great in the car, on walks, picking up the phone, right? realize an ongoing dialogue is probably going to be best for everyone. And of course, if the time comes and there's a sense that you can't help this person in the community, or if your kid perhaps needs more assistance than you're able to give, maybe there's some good resources to look into. Speak to your pediatrician, maybe find a therapist that works with families. Maybe someone at the church can be helpful. There are a lot of resources out there. Okay. Last but not least, certainly not least, I'd like to talk about meaning. Okay. Meaning is there for the taking, or maybe even better put, meaning is there for the making. Whether we recognize it or not, we are all attaching meaning to this saga. The wonderful thing about meaning, it's not a one-size-fits-all construct. It's highly personal, it's flexible, it's breathable. As Shakespeare said, there is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. There is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. This brilliantly speaks to the power of thought, right? Looking back, what do you hope to have seen in all this? What lessons have been learned? What opportunities has this given you? Do you have a greater appreciation for your health or your resources or your congregation? Have you reached out to some long lost friends and sort of rejoined each other based on this shared reality? Have you taken some time to take inventory of where you've been and where you're going? All of these things are an attempt to find a silver lining on an otherwise fairly black cloud. Deliberate reflection and introspection can get you moving on this. So I really encourage you to take some time. What is the meaning of all this? How do we make meaning here? Okay. Viktor Frankl was a Viennese psychiatrist. He wrote a treatise on meaning and how it can be an orienting and inspiring force. He was a prisoner in a variety of concentration camps and spoke to his experience in a great book, which I would highly recommend. My sense is most of you or some of you have probably read it. Definitely worth a read. In this book, he said, those who have a why to live for can bear with almost any how. Those who have a why to live for can bear with almost any how. Frankl did not find meaning in his suffering per se, but in the ways his suffering was eased by commitments to goals that went beyond mere survival, such as tending to other people's wounds in the camp, small creative tasks, periodic check-ins with friends where he could, taking the best care of his physical self, even putting his best efforts in during the forced labor activities, right? Frankl invented meaning to provide purpose. Purpose provided inspiration, and inspiration was needed to navigate what he went through, all leading to what he would term post-traumatic growth. Post-traumatic growth. Meaning could be big, it could be small, it could be short-term, it could be long-term, it could be profound, it could be simple. Ultimately, meaning is there for the making if we take time to make it. Okay? That seems like a good place to stop. Thank you for this opportunity. This was actually very meaningful to me. I appreciate you coming out tonight, and I hope some of this was helpful. Okay.
Oh my gosh, if we can even know he can't hear it, if we can just kind of applaud in the sky here for Jim.
Thank you.
I took a lot of notes. I was feeling a lot of things you were saying. So I really appreciate your time and all your wisdom because, wow, it's some of the things, like you said, we've heard before, but we have a very different lens now with all the things that are going on. So I really appreciate you so much. If you have a question and want to put it in the chat box, please feel free to do that. I will say that we are recording this, so don't make it too personal, of course. And I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't say that if you or someone you know really is struggling with something very serious, please reach out to Elizabeth and Chuck and get the help that that you need. It looks like, just so everyone knows, the book that Jim was just talking about there, both CJ, Tara, and looks like Elizabeth have put that in the chat box. Everybody has that, A Man's Search for Meaning, by Frankl. So if there's any other comments, questions, taking it all in, deciding what you want to take with you.
So you can ask a question in the chat box, or you can, if we are good at taking turns, we can unmute ourselves and ask questions. But remember, when you ask a question, you have to unmute yourself or we won't hear it.
That is true.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Shane has put in a question, and part of this might actually be directed toward Kirk. What are the next steps to become a WISE church, and what happens now? So I'll answer my part of it, and then you could kind of maybe jump on. So what the group has done so far is to put a draft of a covenant together of what we agree as a congregation we're going to do, which is to be welcoming and inclusive and supportive and engaged. And so what that means. And so this is the first step of informing and educating the congregation of what mental health is and means. I think that there is a lot of stigma, and we want to make sure we're using the right words, the right tone, and a lot of things that Jim talked about, not only for ourselves, but how we interact with others. So there's a process of going through and educating the church of kind of all these different things and the language that we should be using. And then we'll get to the point, maybe in the spring. It's kind of hard to say a timeline just because we're not meeting as we normally would be. If we were all together and didn't have this crazy pandemic going on, we would be having meetings after church and we would be talking about this more. So we've talked about maybe after the live stream of church, would we have a Zoom call like this to talk about it in more detail, talk about what it means to be wise and walking with folks, and really continue to encourage people to join the choir and be on a board and bring your kids. It's okay with what they've got going on. We want everybody to come. And so all those kinds of topics we'll talk about and really encourage people. So that's where we are from our side. I don't know if you want to add anything more to that, but that's kind of where we're at.
Do the churchy church thing. Now the 10 steps that are listed there are all important steps, but they're not linear. They don't happen all at the same time, and they don't happen in the same order that they should for every congregation. There's a really helpful document on the page. It's the 10 steps as experienced by a church in Colorado and how it worked for them. So the biggest thing is figure out where you're going to start. Is it you're going to do a book group, or maybe you're going to find a way to start a support group, not a therapy group, but a spiritual support group for people that does help people address things with mental health, with physical health, all of that, with all health, and you start. So not linear, and you'll get to the end at some point, and it's not a destination, it's part of a journey.
Yeah, and of the 10 steps, we've talked to spiritual council. I am leading the group. We've put a draft of the covenant together. We're starting to do the education of the congregation. The congregation will vote on it. I can only think of 5 off the top of my head, but those are the steps that we're talking about. So yeah, we have not done it in order. We're getting through it. So there is a formalized process, Jane, and we will get through that. But it kind of culminates with voting and really affirming that, yes, we're going to continue to do this like we did with open and affirming. And obviously it doesn't stop there. Like you said, we will continue to do that. So thank you. Excellent question. I'm going to read what Peter Grant wrote here in the chat box. Part of the thinking on WISE is to recognize in adults problems we would otherwise could miss. So what issues ought we be looking for that we might easily miss? Is that a question, Peter, you think more for Jim? You can unmute yourself if you want to. Or you can type it in.
Yeah. We all know about the one issue that struck a lot of us hard a year or so ago, and some of us feel personally. We had a suicide in the church, and we don't want any more of that kind of thing. And so I'm just concerned. In retrospect, I think the signs were there that this guy was depressed. There's no question about that. But so some of us feel personally not responsible, but we don't want to go through it again. That's the bottom line. And so what sorts of things, they may be obvious to you, but they weren't obvious to us, or they weren't obvious to me, that we should be looking for people that are really having problems.
Sure. Well, one fairly clear thing could be the way their disposition, right? Their general disposition. So I'm not really sure what specifically you're referring to, but the way the person's carrying themselves, hygiene, that type of thing, that is what tends to go pretty quickly when people start feeling absolutely hopeless and helpless, right? I guess I'm wondering, just since I'm not familiar with the interactions, are you asking primarily during a service of some sort? How would we pick up on that? Or
no, our church is small enough in terms of regular attendees that after a while you tend to know many of the people.
Elizabeth, did you want to say something?
Yeah, Peter, can I try?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, so I think one of the things is when someone dies by suicide, we really wrestle with, could we have done something to stop it? Yeah. And could we have somehow helped? And I think that's what's in our hearts and minds when we think of this person who has passed, because he was a significant part of our community and did a lot of work, good work in our community. And so it's always sad when that happens. So maybe you can help us with that, Jim.
Sure. Well, may I ask, was there some sort of community gathering to discuss?
Yes, there was a memorial service, and then we did talk about this in the different groups that met. There wasn't something official, but we did talk about it in different groups. Yeah.
Okay.
But the memorial service struck me anyway. The person they were talking to at the memorial service had his background, his history, his youth had nothing to do with what we witnessed at GCC on a regular basis. That was part of the issue.
Okay.
I guess it should have been obvious that that this was that, but it wasn't.
Well, would it be a little bit too deep to ask what we were seeing? Because the data might be right there. I'm just wondering, have people discussed it?
Yeah, I think we have discussed it in smaller groups. I don't know if you, maybe the larger question, because this is being recorded and we don't want to get too into this, is how can we help people who are we feel are depressed or have withdrawn from the community, or when we call to check in, and then when someone dies by suicide, there are lots of ways to wrestle with what we could have done, and maybe what are some things we can help process. I noticed Kirk put a book in the chat that said communities and suicide prevention. Maybe that's something he wants to speak with, but I don't know, Jim, if you want to help us with that.
Sure. Well, I could put in some ideas, and then Kirk, if you want to as well. One very powerful thing can be coming together as a community, not so much just in a memorial sense, but what can we learn? How can we honor this person by learning from what we witnessed with him? And so as a congregation, we can take this information and learn from it, so we could be more aware of these signs and symptoms as we see it. It is a very hard thing to keep track of someone on that level. I don't know if this person had family that was also part of the church. Or if so if this was a single person, single male, are you really ultimately only gathering data from what you might see on a once a week basis?
Well, again, we don't want to get into a lot of detail here, and the question is more more global. Let's make it more global, and forget about the suicide for a second. But there's a lot of people that are underemployed, and a lot of people like that, and a lot of people who just have given up. I think that I'm not speaking personally. I'm just thinking it's pretty obvious to me, and it was made more obvious by this event of last year, no question about it. But it's become obvious to me that one of the roles of a church is to nurture people in these situations. So I think the WISE thing really hit me hard because it happened to have. I went with Elizabeth to the genesis of the WISE thing with the UCC downtown, and I just think we could really do a really good job with this, and I think it's absolutely necessary. I think it could be materially helpful to not just our church, really to all of Glenview.
And I think that's what a lot of the education that we'll be doing for the congregation is, a lot of these types of things, Peter, and not that we can solve everyone's problems. I did have someone in the congregation come up to me and say, wow, Lauren, you got a really big job leading this group and you're going to solve everyone's mental health problems. I can't even figure out my own. So that's clearly not the point of the group. But I think to kind of what you're saying, Peter, is that we really are walking with people and connecting with people as a church and those types of things. And as we go through these steps and we reach out to Kirk for more advice and think about these things, I think we will learn more of how to best be that church to maybe help identify things. And that does not mean that we will be perfect. I work in a safety field, and you know what? It's not perfect, but we're going to do what we can to be better and to be better at it. So if that kind of satisfies what you're thinking now, Peter, I think, that's kind of where
I don't think there's a Rosetta Stone to this at all. I really don't. I think you can also get caught up in the empathy part of it and not see the forest of the trees. And I'm sure we will be working on all of that too.
I did see that CJ put a question in to shift things a little bit for you, Jim. What positive meaning, if any, do you think the pandemic has had for raising mental health awareness? Or do you feel like it's still pretty taboo in our culture? That's a good question, CJ.
Great question. Yeah, I think it is less and less taboo. And I think the pandemic has really been helpful in that regard. In fact, there's an article in the New York Times from last week about how the amount of people trying to get into grad school to become therapists has really skyrocketed in 2020, with people understanding the value, the necessity of it. So I think that may be ultimately a silver lining for this is mental health will become far less stigmatized because we're all feeling it. It's a global experience. So I definitely feel that the stigma is going to be positively affected by this.
I ask a follow-up just on that, or is that
Totally.
okay?
Yeah.
Jim and Kirk, do you think, my personal perception is that it's more stigmatized in upper middle class communities than not. Although having said that, I know there are groups of people of color where it is too, but I feel like around here, like if there's a suicide, there have been several suicides in our general area, unfortunately, of younger people. Yeah. And no one really talks about it, or it's very loosely mentioned how they died, and therefore anyone who may be having suicidal thoughts maybe thinks like nobody cares or whatever. So I'm just wondering if you have any perspective, and if it's a long answer, please don't worry about answering it, but just wondering in like our type of, in the type of North Shore communities we all live in, if you think that that is a fair perception, and if there's anything other than those who suffer from it themselves or have a family member who do talk pretty openly about it. I don't know if you have some suggestions for how to kind of get over that in our type of world around here.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. I think that is a reality. There is a sort of a shame piece that plays into mental health in certain communities along the North Shore. And certainly there are suicides that are ignored or sort of covered up. Let's not talk about that. Let's just get this over it. And that does not send a great message to other people that are struggling. So a lot of kids I see, and I practice in a little bit more of an affluent area, they speak to the power of musicians, really film, all these different types of depictions of mental illness is not a shameful thing, as being very instrumental to them. In fact, I'll tell you one thing. I grew up in Lake Forest, and one reason I decided to become a psychologist was the movie Ordinary People. The therapist in that, Judd Hirsch, I thought was so brilliant and touched me on such a personal level. And I think I probably would have gotten to it had I not seen that movie, but it certainly helped me along the way. So that doesn't exactly answer your question, but it does speak to some resources that I hope are normalizing this type of thing for the younger generation. Above and beyond that, to have this be a topic, the WISE program, it being a thing in itself sort of puts it out in the community. More dialogues on it, the more we can talk about it, the less stigmatized it will become, right? Once again, I think that is a silver lining of the pandemic. People are forced to talk about feelings and thoughts and worries now, so more than ever, perhaps. So really, I think it comes down to an idea of normalizing it and opening up dialogues on it. That's what we need, more and more of. I don't want to hijack everything. I don't know if Kurt, maybe you have.
Yeah, I completely agree with all of that. The only thing that I would add to it is from a religious standpoint, and especially from a clergy standpoint, I'm clergy in a church, the clergy have to, we have to know that people's privacy should be respected, right? We've always known that. But we also have to be able to speak about things like depression and anxiety and mental health in general in the same way that we would talk about someone breaking their arm or having cancer or anything like that, so that we're not afraid to speak of those things. The book that I put in there about the Life-Saving Church, written by a member of the Mental Health Network, is a brilliant resource. That's one of those things in the bibliography of good books to do in a book study. The other one is called Blessed Are the Crazy, which was written by a minister in the United Church of Christ, Sarah Lund, who is super cool and super famous now for writing that book. But yeah, the clergy here, who's the clergy here? Raise your hand.
I am.
Right from the pulpit. Same thing as the casserole things.
Right.
Yeah.
I always find it remarkable when I'm talking to on a Sunday morning, or I talk to different folks that have told me, given me privileged information about their family and their mental health struggles. And I really wish I could just sit them all in a room so they could talk to each other, right? So it's sort of selfish. This is selfish on my part, where I wanted to be so normalized that when we see each other and we say, how are you doing? And you can say, well, physically I'm fine, but I've really just had a hard week and it sort of set me back and I just need a little extra attention, and so I think that's totally it. I completely agree, Kirk. We need to get to that point.
Mm-hmm. I don't wish struggles on anyone, but I think that one of the most effective is a hard word to use here, but the way that I connected with the congregation most in regards to mental health is when I talked about my own dealing with depression. And it opened up doors. The way that another way that I was more open to the congregation was when I got divorced. And all of a sudden, people were like, hey, this is a real person and we can talk to this real person. So I don't wish divorce or mental health struggles on anyone. But if it's destigmatized, things like that are destigmatized and people can talk about it, then we are all better connected to one another.
Absolutely. I completely agree. I don't see any more comments. I want to respect everyone's time. I know many of us spend.
I had a comment.
Oh, I'm sorry, Murray. I didn't see you. Go ahead.
Oh, hello. First of all, I thank you for this wonderful program. And stigma reduction is an ongoing process, this being a critical part of that. By talking more about this topic, we normalize it, and it becomes just one of many topics we talk about. I have vast experience with mental illness with young folks, my own kids plus their friends, all in my house. And my filmmaking daughter actually made films about her struggles as a teen, and they're still out there on her Vimeo channel. And Elizabeth, you're aware of Melissa, right? So her films are still out there.
Yes, she's incredible. Yes.
Right.
Incredible.
So I'm on the other side of that, where I had sometimes was visiting her and treatment and that sort of thing. And then giving back is part of it. I do peer facilitation for parents and family members of those with mental illness, and that helps me too. It's a two-way street. And then Elizabeth, your comment about connecting the dots, because there may be many people that really would like to talk to each other in the congregation, but they just can't make the connection. I think being a wise congregation is making those connections. The North Shore Guilt on my old street, in my house and in a house 2 doors to the left and in a house 3 doors to the right, all had children with serious mental illness issues. And only much later, when they were adults, did I finally find out what was going on in these other very close houses. So that's an example of a neighborhood that wasn't open to mental illness topics. And our goal, as you indicated, Kirk, is for us to be a congregation where we don't have those situations. We know about what every family is going through.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, Mary. I appreciate that. I'll just wrap everything up. My goodness, Kirk and Jim, thank you so much for spending your evening with us, your wisdom. It was just fantastic. I think we all got something out of it and took notes. And I love, Jim, how at the beginning you talked about we don't all have to, of course, be perfect, and we don't have to take everything that you told us. But if there's little snippets that we can start incorporating into what we've got going on, that'll help us and help everyone around us, and we can share that. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Thanks to my wise friends for helping put this together. And yes, be safe, be well, and I hope to see all of you very soon. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, all.
Bye.
All right, here we go.